I'm back! What's up guys, my name is Moo. I'm a college student who loves reading and I'm here to share that love with all of you. I'm getting behind, man. The books that I usually have to film, I've read a while ago. I finished this book less than 10 minutes ago. So just getting a little bit down to the wire, but that's okay because I'm a fast reader, so I will get you guys more books and soon. It's pretty fitting that I'm wearing this camouflage. I have no torso, guys. Isn't that crazy? Where'd it go? I don't see anything. Anyways, it is pretty fitting that I'm wearing this camo today because today I am reviewing An Intimate History of Killing by Joanna Bork, I believe. Bork. I find it funny because that's what I say when I see a dog. I'll go, oh, dog, bork, instead of bark. I don't know why, but I do. So I actually wasn't planning to coordinate my outfit with the topic of the book, which is obviously the military. It's an extensive history on the three major wars of the 20th century, which are the two world wars in Vietnam. But yeah, it just happened. I'm wearing camo and I don't know. Before I get into it, I want to make sure that you guys know that we are talking about war very extensively, as it says in the title, very intimately. So if you don't like topics of war or murder or killing or just anything bad in general, probably shouldn't be watching this video. But if you are like me and you're interested in war history, or you just want to watch my video on my channel, thank you by the way, then that's great. Without further ado, let's get into the summary. It's a big book. One day, writes Henry DeMann in his book The Remaking of a Mind, I secured a direct hit on an enemy encampment, saw bodies or parts of bodies go up in the air, and heard the desperate yelling of the wounded or the runaways. I had to confess to myself that this was one of the happiest moments of my life. The characteristic act of men at war is killing, not dying, Joanna Bork argues. For politicians, military strategists, and many historians, war may be about the conquest of territory or the struggle to recover a sense of national honor, but for the man on active service, warfare is a sanctioned bloodletting. In An Intimate History of Killing, Bork presents us with a graphic, unromanticized, and chilling look at men at war, and revises many of the long-held beliefs about the nature of violence and the behavior of soldiers in three great wars of this century. The two world wars and the Vietnam War bloodied the hands and consciences of thousands of British, American, and Australian men and women. In this book, the combatants, men and women, soldiers, nurses, and priests, share their fantasies and experience of intimate killing and, in the process, reveal themselves as individuals transformed by a range of conflicting emotions: fear and ecstasy, rage and exhilaration, hatred and empathy. What kind of men make the best killers? How do soldiers cope with the horrors they witness and atrocities they are ordered to commit? How do soldiers readjust to normal civilian life? These and many other disturbing questions are answered in a series of sharply drawn chapters on subjects such as the pleasure of war, training men to kill, love and hate, and war crimes. The answers based on the letters, diaries, memoirs, and reports of veterans are always surprising, often shocking. Bork concludes that the structure of war encourages pleasure. There's more. In killing, and that perfectly ordinary, gentle human beings, rather than sociopaths, can become the most enthusiastic, efficient killers. Bork reveals to us in explicit detail, previously absent from the most published accounts of war, some of the grisly ways in which soldiers often cope with horrors of combat, such as sexualizing of killing, the avid collection of body parts of slain enemies, and the rape and murder of civilians, including children. Most surprisingly, she makes the intriguing argument that this encouragement to kill and take pleasure in killing does not nurture men who will later commit violence in civilian contexts. With unflinching honesty, Bork shows how men and women just like us can become capable of grotesque acts of violence, can be made to seek pleasure in landscapes of extreme violence. An Intimate History of Killing aims at nothing less than to put the killing back into military history. That was a lot. I'll be honest. I'm not going to talk much about the war crimes and the grotesque things that happened. I'm going to mostly stick to baseline, the killing of other soldiers in the military, and just that. But this book does contain really dark topics. I just don't want to repeat them because I read those stories with just a resting gross face. I was very disgusted by it. I don't feel like I want to repeat that, so I'm not going to. However, the awful things done to civilians are listed in this book, and while I'm not covering it, I just want you guys to be aware that it is there. So, yeah. I'm laughing because I'm a little overwhelmed with the information. I know this is a serious topic. I'm not going to try to make light of it or anything, even if I am being more than just baseline serious. It's not in my nature to be stoic all the time, and while I will be serious when the time is appropriate, if I do end up making jokes or being light about something, there's my disclaimer. It doesn't mean that I don't respect the people involved in this, in the tragedies, but I do want to say I probably won't be as stoic as some other people because that's just not my nature. Without further ado, let's talk about the intimate history of killing. The opening to the story is pretty shocking because it goes right into the pleasure that some men felt killing. It was really a little bit scary to read at first because I thought that would be the theme of the entire book, that all men who go to war suddenly feel a deep sense of satisfaction and pleasure in killing. That luckily was not the case when I kept reading it, but wow. It was a lot to start with, and it really set the stage wrong, but I digress. It was pretty well written and it taught me a lot, so there's that. I will say that the one problem I had with the writing is the runoff sentences were absolutely insane. As a fluent English speaker, I am very proficient and comprehensive in reading a lot of different things. For example, this isn't a brag, this is helping prove my point, but throughout all of elementary school, which is when we did speed reading tests to test reading and comprehension, I was always the fastest reader in class. I always comprehended everything I read, and I read it really fast. However, I had to stop and pause so many times to understand grammatically how a sentence worked. And I feel like an author of a book like this would argue, well, you're just not smart enough to understand or something like that. And I'm not saying that she's pretentious or anything, but I feel like it could be a possibility with books like this. And it was not the content or the vocabulary that was difficult for me, it was the grammar, because the way that she wrote things, it was just it would list these long things. I had to count the lines that a sentence took up. It was an entire paragraph of one sentence. I saw that a couple times and it was just very confusing. There was a lot of things that should have been broken up into multiple sentences that existed in one, and that was the only thing that I thought was really confusing. I read it mostly with ease, but also semi-frequently I would have to stop to look at a sentence and read it very slowly, looking where all of the punctuation was to figure out what the sentence meant. But the grammar was the only thing I had a problem with. The actual content of the book was very well researched, it was very well cited, and I learned a ton. As I had previously mentioned, I'm very into war history. I have been for as long as I can remember. I remember checking out books in the library in elementary school about stuff like that. So it's just something I've always been interested in, even though I am extremely anti-war. This book helped solidify that war, unlike most issues, is a black and white issue. War is bad. The only reason war exists is because of evil people doing evil things that constitutes war. If there were not evil people in power, wars would not have to exist in the 21st century because we are such a connected world. We understand each other more than any other time we have in all of history, and we should just be able to communicate about things rather than threaten to kill each other. War as a concept is just insane. I'm going to deplete you of all resources and all people until you're too weak and have to surrender. That's insane. In this day and age, when we are more connected than ever, at least in the 21st century, war is not something that we need. We just don't need it. So it's safe to say war is bad. That's not a very controversial opinion. I'm pretty sure a lot of us agree with that. War is bad. Don't war. Don't do it. It's just not, it's not necessary. This book really solidified that opinion. I had that opinion before and I was very strong about it, but reading through all these things, there's just no reason war needs to happen. One thing that did help a lot is that the formatting of this book went back and forth between the people who enjoyed war and those who felt guilty over war and that kind of thing. So it wasn't a lot of depressing information at once and then it got better or whatever. It switched back and forth so I didn't get depressed reading all this stuff because war is just such a depressing topic. There's not really any other way to talk about it. And yes, you have all the media that depicts soldiers as heroes and all that, but people are still dying in the movies, even if they're fictional. It's not a fun concept. Maybe in fiction, it's fun to explore, but in reality, it's just devastating and depressing and discouraging and all that. It's just bad in general. So the fact that it talked about information that I found insane and then humanized these people in war, that helped a little bit. One thing that was very assuring to know is love is a lot more powerful than hate. People were more inspired to fight for their comrades, for the ones they loved at home, than to fight against an enemy they hated. There were so many instances throughout the book where a soldier was cited saying that he didn't hate the people he was fighting at the front lines. He actually respected them and it was a fair fight and like sportsmanlike or something, because yeah, war is a sport. That's, yeah. Reading stuff like that just made me roll my eyes because war is not a sport. War is not a sport. There are people that don't go home. War is not a sport. But so many people thought it that way, and they thought if their killing was sportsmanlike, then they wouldn't have to be as guilty and I guess whatever to cope. But like, that is just a crazy narrative because no form of killing is justified, but that's how they coped with it. They talked about it like a sport. But anyways, the general consensus was usually that soldiers respected the soldiers fighting them. Obviously, the countries and the governments which they were fighting, they definitely probably hated more on average, but the actual people they were fighting, they had respect for, and even regretted the fact that they had to fight against them. So it was good to know that the power of love in itself is much more powerful than the power of hatred towards someone else. It gives me a little bit of hope in humanity because this book was so close to shattering it, but my humanity is still intact. I'm the type of person who looks for silver linings on every dark cloud. So since I always look on the positive, it is easy for me to look on the positive in this. And that was one of the biggest positives that I had. One thing that I was happy to find outdated is there was a quote from a soldier that said that, oh, every generation goes through war. My grandfather was enlisted in this war, and then my father was enlisted in this war, and now I will fight for my country here. Luckily, that seems pretty outdated. Obviously, it would be extremely ignorant to say that we haven't had any wars after Vietnam, because obviously we have. I mean, look at the conflict in Europe now. To say that that stuff isn't happening and that it's not major would be extremely stupid, extremely ignorant, and would probably negatively affect a lot of people. So I'm not saying that wars haven't happened since Vietnam. I'm just saying in America, at least in the US, there have been no major conflicts since Vietnam that would warrant a draft, for example. My grandpa, for example, was born in 1955. He never had to fight in a war. My dad never had to fight in a war. My generation hopefully will never have to dream of anything like that. So that is an outdated thing. We're not expected to fight in wars because our ancestors have. And that's really good. I really was uplifted by that, knowing that it's a thing. I remember as a kid, since I was a kid that was really interested in war history, I knew a lot about drafting, that it existed, and wars, as much as they fascinated me, terrified me. So I've been anti-war for a long time, even though I've been into military history. And I remember hearing once, a long time ago, I was probably about 8 years old, and I didn't know there were other conflicts going on in the world, so I heard stuff in a foreign country, and I thought my dad would have to get drafted, and it freaked me out. But then my dad had to calm me down over the course of like a half an hour because I was just freaked out, saying that he is past the age of being drafted and all that, and that calmed me down. But wow, it freaked me out. I'm glad that I never had to be a child that had to go through that, or I hope I never have to be a spouse that has to go through that, because I just, the thought of that, being drafted, that was always one of my biggest fears, that would happen in my lifetime, and I really hope it doesn't. And I'm lucky that I live in America where we have a really big military, even though again I am anti-military and wish they didn't have to exist, but since it does have to exist, I'm thankful that we're protecting us. It's a complex feeling. I'm glad that it's big enough where we don't have to draft people as of now, but again, complicated. Another thing that I found very interesting was the way that they treated women in combat. Well, I wouldn't say combat, I meant in war in general, because while women were offered roles in the military, it was usually non-combatant roles, and they were seen as weaker, or they'd be a hindrance to combat or something like that, even though obviously not. I don't want to shoot a gun, but I definitely could. I'm a certified archery instructor, and I know that's not the same thing, but you know what? If I can get a bullseye, I am a good, I'm good at target practice. But that's besides the point. It's not that I want to, but it's the fact that I can, you know? It's usually not, well, I want to do this, I just want to be able to because I know I can. It's that kind of thing. And yet throughout the entire 20th century, women were denied combatant roles for the longest time. I think it was 1975 when they were finally allowed to do that. And again, that was after Vietnam. So since we were talking about those three conflicts, you didn't see many women in the book, but there was a chapter on women, which I probably think is my favorite. Yes, my favorite chapter in the book was probably the one about women in war, because they just proved themselves. Obviously, it's just crazy to think about how many things that society said women couldn't do, and looking back at it now when we're doing all the things society said we couldn't do, it's just kind of silly. But at the time, it was just, it was a really dumb chapter. It was real silly, saying women couldn't do this, women couldn't do that, and it's just like, yeah, duh, we can. What I learned that I found the funniest was apparently women were thought to have lower fear thresholds, and I just had to laugh at that, because when you think of true crime fans, you think of women, you know? I mean, as I said, I was a pretty big war history fanatic in elementary school, and I mean, I learned what Nazis were before I even started school. I learned about the Titanic in kindergarten, the Revolutionary and Civil Wars all through elementary school, and then I started shifting to World War II in middle school, and that through high school, and now I'm learning about the First World War and the Vietnam War. It's always been an interest of mine to learn, so obviously I didn't have a big fear threshold when it came to that, but for some reason, oh, sorry, women are scaredy cats. I just found it so silly. Like, I mean, if they would look at us in 2023, where I'm the type of person who, when I first watched Squid Game in the first episode, when they were playing Red Light, Green Light, and they were all going down to the song Fly Me to the Moon, and it was just beautiful, and I smiled through the entire thing, not because I liked watching fictional people die. That's not what I found pleasure in. It was just the way it was choreographed and just and it was just beautiful. The way that they told them to fall was beautiful, and Squid Game is a masterpiece. Watch it if you haven't. I've watched it 4 times, but this video is not about Squid Game. This video is about real war. Women fear more what society has put in front of us than they do external factors, and that's just a fact. Another thing that I found surprising actually was that there were very, very, very many combatants that never shot at an enemy. When you think about war, you think about all these men shooting things at each other and killing each other and all that, but to know that there were so many men that rarely ever shot their guns, if ever, there's some men that never shot their guns throughout the war. And I don't know, I think that was just a little bit more heartening because it meant there was a good majority of people that couldn't be turned into killers. And I really needed to know that because it was good to hear that, because I was of the assumption that everyone who went to war shot and killed people, and that's just not the case. And again, brought a little faith in humanity to me, so that's good. I mean, it really needed to balance out because my faith was shattered and then built back up and shattered and built back up. But you know what? I ended it intact. I'm okay. I got through this book. I'm gonna read Warrior Cats now. I should really do a video about the extensive series someday of Warrior Cats. I think once I finish the books on my bookshelf, maybe. That's gonna take a while, but who knows? If you're interested in that, tell me so I know. But with that being said, I'm going to end the video here. If you liked the video, like it. If you like what I'm putting out, totally subscribe. That'd be really cool. And comment down below your favorite odd interest. What are you oddly interested in? What is your fascination? I'd like to know. I like war history, but I also like anatomy, which I think is funny. I'm not a big science person, but I really love anatomy, so there's that. Yeah, without further ado, this has been Moo. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye! I secured a direct hit on an enemy